As I made my rounds through each hospital room, I spotted someone in the distance. Could it be a family member of the patient who was just rushed in by emergency? I approached slowly and initiated contact. "Is there something troubling you?" The man, who had been looking down, slowly lifted his gaze to meet mine. "My wife was brought here earlier, and this is all new to me. Thank you for your concern," he said with a smile. Something about his smile seemed familiar, but before I could recall where I'd seen it, he stood up and turned away from me. "I need to be strong," he said, his voice quivering slightly. "I've heard that your family member is in stable condition." I began, then paused, puzzled by my own reaction. Maybe it's because I grew up in a facility, but I've never been good at speaking to people I meet for the first time. Whether it's patients or their families, I tend to become too formal. Yet, with this man, words flowed easily. For some reason, I had this feeling that continuing our conversation might lead to something incredible. Whether it was a good or bad feeling, I couldn't say. "If you need anything, the nurse's station is over there." As I was about to return to my rounds, the man stopped me. Could it be Jody? How did he know my name? Staring at me in disbelief, he stepped closer. "Don't you remember? It's been so many years. I've turned into an uncle now." I began to trace my memories back. Could it be me, returning home after work? Passing by a hair salon, I remembered it was almost time to get my hair cut. When was my next day off, I wondered. Always tying my hair up because of work, I found going to the salon more of a chore. No family, no friends. For someone who has lived like me, grooming was never of any interest. Simple, clean. That was all I sought in fashion. Jody, that's my name, but the parents who gave it to me are no longer here. During a family outing in my kindergarten years, they died in an accident. Although I survived, I was treated as a burden by relatives. Never properly clothed or fed. Children listen more than adults think. "Why do we have to take care of her? Our household is already struggling. We can't afford another child." Hearing adults talk like this, I started to feel like I shouldn't exist. Eventually, I was placed in a facility, but by then, I had already become a child lacking self-confidence. Always hiding, watching, living as told by others. Even now, expressing my feelings is hard. That's why I struggle with relationships at work. However, nursing is the only thing that gives my life purpose. No matter how tough it gets, I can't imagine leaving this job. Once inspired by a nurse, I've always dreamed of being like her. I haven't forgotten that aspiration. To be kind and see people for who they are. Though that's what I wish, reality is often unkind. Growing up without knowing love, maybe dreams are just dreams for me. Just as I start to feel down, I snap back to reality. I was just thinking about making a hair appointment. Spending a lot of time alone, my days lack meaningful conversations. It seems I tend to overthink because of this. As I linger in front of the salon, pedestrians seem to walk around me. I decided to head home quickly to check on my days off. Regaining my composure, I made my way home. After checking my days off, I made an appointment with a hair salon online. I took a bath, then heated up some side dishes I had prepared on my day off. Relaxing at the mini table in my cramped one-room apartment is my favorite time. After fiddling with my mobile phone for a while, I did the dishes and crawled into bed. Tomorrow is a night shift. Before then, I'll go shopping and stock up on prepared dishes. I live a frugal and modest life, by choice. That's what I've always wanted. I had to take out student loans to attend nursing school. The inheritance left by my parents was gone, just keeping up with daily expenses. The relatives who considered me a burden and sent me to a facility were certainly not going to pay for my tuition. I didn't want to be indebted to them for anything. I've been repaying my student loans since I started working as a nurse, so I don't have any savings even now. But borrowing money was essential to achieving my dream. I still find fulfillment in my job and have no regrets about that. Plus, I've always been a simple person, so a modest lifestyle suits me just fine. Lost in thought again, I eventually fell asleep. Waking up the next day, I went shopping as planned. I bought discounted groceries at the supermarket, deciding what to make with them. I've been used to this lifestyle since I started living on my own after leaving the facility. There's no need to make anything fancy since I'm not cooking for anyone else. After quickly finishing shopping, I started cooking as soon as I got home. Even though there's some time for a nap during the night shift, I still wanted to rest a bit before that. Once everything was made and cleaned up, it was past 1 p.m. when I checked the clock. My shift starts at 5 p.m., so considering commute time, I had about 2 hours to spare. After eating some of the dishes I made earlier, I lay down in bed. I played relaxation music from a video site and closed my eyes. This moment was my relaxation time. As I dozed off listening to the music, I dreamt someone was talking to me. Apparently a woman. I could tell she was smiling kindly, but her face was blurry. As a child, I reached out and took the woman's hand. It felt like my heart was slowly warming and melting away. I tried to remember who she was from the depths of my memory, but couldn't identify her. Yet, I wanted to stay in that dream forever. Eventually, the woman's presence faded. And I felt like I was floating on clouds, enveloped in a pleasant atmosphere. Ah, this feels good. As I thought that, a distant sound reached me. It was my mobile phone's alarm, bringing me back to reality. Groggily checking the screen, I saw it was 3:30 p.m. Ah, right. I realized I had been napping and noticed my eyes were wet. It seemed I had cried in my dream. But now, I couldn't even remember what the dream was about. Stretching and shifting my mindset, I started preparing to go to work. Good evening. I arrived at work and greeted my daytime colleagues. They all greeted me back, but it was all business. After handing over the shift, the daytime colleagues left. Today, we're having a party with people from a trading company. I watched them leave, dressed in their fancy outfits, and then one of my fellow night shift workers approached me. It must be nice. I wish I could have gone too. But it's irrelevant to Jody, right? She threw a blatant sarcasm my way. I responded with a laugh, and she sighed. I've become an outlet for the young nurse's stress. Dismissed on unrelated topics, talked behind my back about my belongings or how I dress. During work, they find reasons to dump their tasks on me. Not resisting, I've become even more of a target for some. Even the head nurse scolded me. Don't let the young ones walk all over you. You need to stand up for yourself. But it's easier for me to just go along with what I'm told, given my personality. After finishing checking temperatures and changing 4 drips for the patients in each room, I approached a young nurse to take a break. While eating my homemade soup. How stingy can you be? Look, Jody was raised in a facility, right? Maybe that's related? They were talking behind my back again. I'm used to being judged by others as unfortunate because of my circumstances. Let those who want to talk, talk. I'm happy to be in the profession I've always admired. I'm not strong enough to truly believe that, and I feel out of place. I quickly finished my meal and went outside for some fresh air. The outside air was cold. It calmed my emotions. Unable to gauge distances with others, I've always chosen to be alone. Interacting with anyone scared me. It was easier to close off my heart and stay alone than to express my feelings and build relationships. Being accustomed to being talked about behind my back isn't true even now. I didn't choose to grow up in a facility, and I have feelings too. But I've never been able to find my own worth. Even if I stood up to those talking behind my back, who would acknowledge me? It would only serve to alienate me further. So, it's better to pretend I don't hear it. It hurts less to comply with others' demands, ignoring my own will. That's how I've lived since childhood. I wish they'd just leave me alone. Looking up at the night sky, I sighed and decided to return to my duties. When I came back from my break, the nurse's station was bustling. It seems an emergency patient had been brought in. I helped secure an available bed and prepared for the patient to be smoothly transferred to their room. A few hours later, the patient was finally settled into their room. After the treatment, they seemed to be sleeping. Their condition appeared stable, so we returned to our respective duties, checking on the sleeping patients for any irregularities. Replacing 4 drips. As I made my rounds through each hospital room, I spotted someone sitting on a sofa near the water and hot water dispenser. Apparently not a patient given their casual attire. Probably a family member of the patient who was just brought in. I approached slowly and initiated contact. "Are you a family member of the person who was just brought in?" The man slowly lifted his gaze to meet mine. "Is there something troubling you?" The man looked down again, muttering a soft, no," before looking up at me and responding with a laugh. "My wife was just brought here, and this is all new to me." I was a bit overwhelmed. "Thank you for your concern." He smiled. Something about his smile seemed familiar, but before I could remember, he stood up and turned his back to me. "I need to be strong." His voice trembled slightly. "Your family member is currently sleeping, and I've heard their condition is stable. We are always here to support our patients and their families with compassion." I stopped mid-sentence, struck by a curious thought. I've never been good at speaking with people I'm meeting for the first time. Be it patients or their families, I always end up being too formal. Yet, with this man, words just flowed out of me. When I suddenly got stuck, the man turned back to me and looked into my eyes. I don't know what to say, but please, leave your family members' care to us, and please, don't overdo it. I had this feeling that continuing our conversation might lead to something unbelievable. Whether it was a good or bad feeling, I couldn't tell. I just knew I didn't want to change my current situation. The fear of it made me want to leave this place quickly. If you need anything, the nurse's station is over there." As I was about to return to my rounds, the man stopped me. "Could it be Jody?" Had he seen my name tag? My name was unexpectedly called out. I turned back towards the man. "Could it be Jody?" How did he know my name? Seeing me stand there dumbfounded, the man approached. Then he glanced between the pen in my pocket and my face. "Jody, right? This pen, Lenore gave it to you as a present. I remember because I was there when she bought it." His expression brightened instantly. Lenore? The name struck a chord with me. "Don't you remember? How many years has it been? I've become an uncle now." My memory traced back. Lenore. Among the relatives who took care of me, she was the only one who treated me kindly. She was the reason I chose nursing. Could it be? Lenore had a boyfriend at the time, and they often took me out with them. "It's Ethan. We used to hang out together, remember?" Memories of those times started flooding back. Before I was placed in a facility. In the 3rd grade, I stayed at Lenore's house. Her parents were cold to me, but Lenore was always kind. Her boyfriend, Ethan, would come over to help with my homework. They even took me to an amusement park on a day off. Lenore was training to be a nurse, Ethan was aiming to be a teacher, and I aspired to be like them. Then, there was a day I fell ill with a high fever. Aunt and uncle looked grim. They strictly told me not to pass it to Lenore. In my dazed state, I vaguely remembered. Right, there was an important test coming up. Lenore was preparing for her nursing license exam. It made sense why aunt and uncle wanted to keep me away. But as a child suffering through an unfamiliar high fever, I couldn't help feeling resentful about my life. How long had it been? Lying sick, I had no sense of time. Then, I heard the noisy sound of someone running up the stairs. Aunt was shouting something from below, but my ears were too muffled to make it out. Then, Lenore burst into my room, panting.
Jody! Are you okay?
She peered at my face with a look close to tears. Yeah. My head was too fuzzy to articulate properly. I remembered being told by Uncle and Aunt not to get close to Lenore. Trying to move a bit away from her, my joints ached. Seeing me struggle in the blanket, she said, "It must be hard." And contrary to my feelings, her hand soothingly stroked my head. It felt incredibly comforting. From outside the door, Aunt called out to Lenore.
Lenore! Come out this instant. You know it would be terrible if you caught it, with your exam coming up.
Lenore sighed, smiled at me, and yelled back as she opened the door.
Mom, I'm trying to become a nurse.
Aunt was taken aback by Lenore's unusually loud voice.
I know that.
Aunt faltered.
How can I ignore a child suffering right in front of me? What kind of nurse would that make me?
Her forcefulness left Aunt speechless. I'll take care of my own health. Let me take care of Jody right now. Perhaps realizing she had been too harsh, Lenore spoke to Aunt in her usual gentle tone.
All right, but don't overdo it.
With that, Aunt went downstairs.
Sorry for raising my voice when you're feeling unwell.
Lenore was back to her usual self. Lenore, I'm sorry. I felt guilty for causing an argument with Aunt on my account. And the thought of possibly infecting her with my cold only made my headache worse. It's okay. Look, I brought pudding for you, she said, taking out 2 puddings from a plastic bag and smiled. Let's eat them together. Supported by Lenore, I sat up. The cold pudding was a balm to my feverish body, and I remember it being delicious. Lenore, who took care of me at her own expense, passed her national exam and became the nurse she always wanted to be. After Lenore left home, I was moved to another household, so I lost touch. But the kindness and warmth she showed me stayed with me. That's when I started aspiring to be a nurse. To be a nurse who could sacrifice her own comfort to be close to her patients. With that in my heart, I've come this far. Jody? Lost in the revived memories, Ethan's voice brought me back.
Sorry. I never thought I'd meet you here.
Looking closer, there were indeed traces of the Ethan I remembered. It's been 30 years, huh? Ethan's eyes were moist. When Lenore wakes up, could you let her see your face? I nodded quietly, and Ethan, reassured, went home to fetch some things for the hospital stay. While on my rounds, I visited Lenore's room. She seemed to be sleeping. But it was definitely her, Lenore. My role model. I never imagined we would meet again like this. I wonder how I appear to her, now that she's awake. A mix of hope and anxiety swirled within me. After finishing my night shift, I went home and took a short nap. I had a hair appointment scheduled for the afternoon. I've been keeping the same hairstyle for years, just trimming my grown-out hair, but this time I decided to change it. Worried that Ethan recognized me, but Lenore might not, I opted for the same hairstyle I had in elementary school. I decided to cut my long hair into a bob. It's been years since I've had my hair this short. My shoulders felt lighter, and somehow, my mood brightened too. The next day at work, I immediately heard the young nurses whispering about my haircut. Some even asked me directly why I cut it, but I just gave a vague response and focused on my duties. Soon, it was time to change Lenore's for drip. Entering her room, Ethan noticed me and gave me a look. Nervously, I approached her. "Lenore, the nurse is here for you," Ethan called out, and Lenore turned towards me. Our eyes met, and my heartbeat quickened. Ah, it was definitely Lenore. I had seen her sleeping face, but now, making direct eye contact stirred something in me. I looked away and started changing the foredrip. "I'm going to change your foredrip now," I said, reaching for the nearly empty bag. "Then, Jody?" she called out in the same gentle voice as back then. Tears welled up in my eyes. "It is Jody." Both Lenore and Ethan smiled warmly. How did you know it was me?" It had been 30 years since we last met, and I had aged into a middle-aged woman. "I heard from Ethan about meeting someone from the past. Plus, there were hints of the old you." I wondered what would have happened if I hadn't changed my hair to how it was back then. Sensing my thoughts, Lenore continued. "It's not just the hairstyle." She glanced at my chest. "I remember that pen well." The pen in my pocket, remembered by Ethan too, seemed to shine. The pen was a cute character-themed one, not really suiting my plain self. It had been the subject of ridicule by my colleagues time and again. "You're so plain, why is that pen the only cute thing about you? It doesn't suit you." Despite the ridicule from colleagues, I never parted with it. It was a precious gift from Lenore, a reminder of my dream to become a compassionate nurse like her. The ink no longer flowed. Yet, I kept it in my pocket as a sort of lucky charm. "Thank you for treasuring it." And Lenore, supported by Ethan, sat up. "To think you've become such a splendid nurse." Tears welled up in Lenore's eyes too. "I'm still far from it. I became a nurse admiring you, but I'm nowhere near good enough." Lenore gently took my hand. "That's not true. Do you remember the promise we made?" I nodded. When Lenore left home, we promised each other. I would become a compassionate nurse like her, and she would remain my nursing idol. We vowed to meet again as nurses. "Thank you for fulfilling our dream of becoming a nurse." "I've worked hard too." Lenore shared her journey since then. After starting her nursing career, she returned home only to find I was gone. She had planned to take me in once she was settled. But by then I was moved to another relative's house, and soon after, to another home. It became difficult to track me down, and she regretted it deeply. "I should have taken you with me when I left," she apologized with a sad look. I squeezed her hand back. She then shared about marrying Ethan. They were childless, but she had risen to the rank of nursing director. I was speechless, only managing to nod. Then she pulled out a pen identical to mine from the side table drawer. "I've kept it as a lucky charm too. I always believed we'd meet again." Overwhelmed with joy, I hugged Lenore. Could there have been a moment as heartwarming as this? Ethan gently stroked our backs as we embraced. After finishing Lenore's foredrip change, I returned to the nurse's station, where the head nurse scolded me. "You know better than to bring personal matters to work, especially not as a senior nurse." The young nurses behind tried to stifle their laughter. Indeed, the head nurse was right upon reflection. Seeing my sincere regret, she didn't pursue it further. "If it was such a moving reunion, I won't say more. But be careful going forward." Leaving those words behind, the head nurse returned to her duties. Usually, when I got scolded for making a mistake, I'd feel down and sulk, but for some reason, now I felt motivated to keep trying. I believe this positive feeling came from my reunion with Lenore. After finishing my shift that day, I visited Lenore again as a personal visit. When I told her about being scolded by the head nurse, she laughed.
I would have scolded you too. Sorry.
Lenore apologized. It was only with her that I could laugh about my mishaps. No matter how much time had passed, I realized she was the only person I could depend on like this. A few days later, Lenore was discharged. I, as a nurse, saw her off, but Ethan handed me a small folded piece of paper as he was leaving. The head nurse was watching closely to ensure I didn't mix personal matters with work again. But since Lenore was talking to the head nurse, we left the ward unnoticed. During a break, I opened the paper Ethan had given me, which had Lenore's contact information and address. It was written small, "Be sure to contact me." The address was within walking distance from where I lived. How come we never crossed paths, living so close by? I smiled bitterly at fate's mischief. A year later, I was hurrying home from work. Today was Ethan's birthday party. Lenore was waiting with delicious food. Since then, I had started visiting their home often. Ethan had suggested,
"Why don't we live together?" But Lenore and I refused.
We both understood the erratic nature of our jobs.
Even I hesitate around you sometimes. I wouldn't want Jody to feel that way,
Lenore had said. Ethan was disappointed, but he brightened up when I expressed how happy his thought made me.
Then, let's all live together once we retire,
he proposed, and Lenore and I laughed, sharing a look. Ethan, surprised by our reaction, couldn't help but be endearing on his birthday. We planned to celebrate it wholeheartedly. After toasting together, Lenore asked about my recent work. Since reuniting with her, the backtalk and scapegoating from colleagues had decreased. It turned out Lenore and the nursing director at my hospital were classmates, and after my colleagues found out, they kept their distance.
Mixing personal matters, Lenore's doing it too, right? I joked.
Do you not realize it yourself? She countered with a question. Puzzled, she then explained with a gentle smile. Since reuniting with her, my expressions had become richer. This change had positively impacted my image at work, which had been rather gloomy, according to our nursing director. I felt embarrassed. Indeed, since I started visiting them, I had been looking forward to each day, counting down to when I could visit again, and finding motivation in work for those days. I never imagined being evaluated in such a manner. And although I had been far from promotion, talks of becoming a supervisor had started. Actually, I had another piece of news I hadn't shared with them yet. After hearing my story, they teased me, which made me blush. Since reuniting with her, a doctor from the same hospital had asked me out. My work and personal life had suddenly brightened, thanks to them. Expressing my gratitude, Lenore said.
It's a quality you've always had.
Ethan, eager to contribute, chimed in.
All right. Since Jody has been reborn.
Wondering what he would suggest, Lenore and I excitedly focused on Ethan.
Let's make today the birthday of the new Jody.
Ethan raised his glass high. Lenore and I followed suit. And we toasted together.
Happy birthday! Thank you so much for taking care of the kids.
Margaret, my son's wife, said cheerfully.
Don't mention it. We were looking forward to seeing our grandchildren too. I'm relieved to hear that. Taking care of the grandchildren is truly a pleasure, isn't it?
Then, with a sly smile, Margaret makes an outrageous demand.
Since it's such a joy to see your adorable grandchildren, I'll be charging $500 per child. You're joking, right?
Margaret stops laughing and replies with a serious face. I'm not joking. I'm entrusting strangers with my precious children. It's only natural to ask for a rental fee.
Strangers? A rental fee?
I felt sad hearing the words that came from Margaret's mouth. Without showing any remorse, Margaret continues. For example, men who don't have girlfriends pay to go on dates with women, right? It's the same thing. My husband, Mark, and I exchanged looks of disbelief.
If that's your attitude, we won't be taking care of the grandchildren.
Neglecting your parenting duties? This is why the elderly are disliked in society these days. I'm sorry, but I have a plane to catch.
Margaret, wait.
My name is Elizabeth. With my beloved husband, Mark, I've lived a life of over 40 years, side by side. It's been a journey too complex to describe in just a few words, filled with endless struggles. But I believe these hardships only deepened our bond and made our time together invaluable. We married in our 20s and struggled to have children for a while. Both sets of parents were eager to see their grandchildren, which gradually put a lot of pressure on me. But Mark was always there to support me gently. He cooperated with fertility treatments and would even visit places said to bless couples with children after work. Thanks to his efforts, we were blessed with a son, David, on our 10th wedding anniversary. David was frail as a child, needing constant attention. But Mark did everything he could to support me, making parenting never feel like a burden. David grew up without major illness or injury and became the star of his high school basketball team, showing just how resilient he had become. Although he struggled with his studies, he managed to graduate from college and started working as a salesperson at a well-known electronics manufacturer, where he met and married Margaret at the age of 30. When our first grandchild was born, Mark, perhaps reminded of our struggles to conceive, sobbed uncontrollably. Despite all our hardships, we overcame them together, and now in retirement, Mark and I enjoy a leisurely life.
We haven't seen them in a while, but I wonder how the grandchildren are doing?
Mark often says, looking out the window with a hint of loneliness. David now has 4 children, and it seems he and Margaret are getting along well, but they're both busy. And opportunities to see the grandchildren are rare. They live far from us in the city center, making visits difficult to arrange. We hesitate to intrude, knowing they're busy, and it might be a bother. Sometimes David calls asking for financial help, understandable since raising 4 children must be costly.
The oldest grandchild is starting school next year, isn't he? We need to buy a present.
It would be nice if they could come over for a long holiday. I wonder if they're too busy. Every time a children's special airs on TV, we eagerly await the day we can see our grandchildren again. Then one day, we receive a call from David after a long time.
Mom, it's been a while. How have you been?
We're as usual. But how about you? Is everyone doing well? You should bring the grandchildren to visit sometime. Dad has been looking forward to it.
Everyone's fine here, so don't worry about us. And we were thinking of bringing the kids over to visit soon.
Really? Dad will be so happy to hear that. Mark is currently out in the backyard, working in the vegetable garden. Imagine how happy he'd be to know David and Margaret are bringing the grandchildren over.
And there's something we'd like to ask you about the kids.
What? Is it about money again? It must be tough with school expenses and all, I understand.
Thanks, as always. We really appreciate it. But this time it's a bit different. Actually, we're planning to go on an overseas trip soon, and we were hoping you could look after the kids while we're away.
Overseas? That's quite sudden. Oh, that's right, you two haven't had your honeymoon yet.
Yeah, Both Margaret and I have been so busy, we never found the time. But last week, Margaret won a pair of tickets for an overseas trip in a raffle.
Oh, in that case, have a great time.
So, when are you bringing the grandchildren? We'll all come over this Saturday, so please wait for us. The kids are looking forward to seeing Grandpa and Grandma.
Is that so? Then I'll prepare some delicious food and wait. Even after hanging up, my excitement couldn't be contained. When Mark came back from the field and saw my face, he asked with a smile,
"What's up? You seem like you've received some good news."
Mark, who has always been by my side through happy and sad times, can instantly sense even my slightest emotions. I told him about David and Margaret coming over.
Really? That's exciting.
On the promised Saturday, David and Margaret arrived with their 4 grandchildren. As soon as their car stopped in the parking lot, I couldn't wait any longer and rushed out the front door.
"Mom, it's been a while. Glad to see you're doing well."
David, getting out of the driver's seat, greeted me with his usual smile. As the grandchildren emerged from the back seat, they all started running around energetically. I smiled at the sight, thinking they must have been bored during the long drive, but then I noticed something off. Their clothes seemed a bit dirty. Faded with time, some were torn or frayed. Considering they have 4 children, I thought they might be financially strained. But Margaret, stepping out of the passenger side, was dressed beautifully. She was in modern, bright casual fashion with fancy accessories. The contrast between her and the grandchildren's attire was shocking.
"Hello, Elizabeth."
The strong scent of her perfume made me cover my nose involuntarily. Margaret, seemingly unaware of her overpowering smell, headed inside.
"We'll leave the kids with you and head out right away."
Back inside, the grandchildren were already running around, with Mark desperately trying to catch them.
"Try to escape from Grandpa."
"Dear, I understand you're happy, but please don't overdo it." Mark was already out of breath and patting his back.
"I want to ride on Grandpa's back."
As one grandchild climbed onto Mark's back, the others gathered around.
"Elizabeth, thank you so much for willingly taking care of the children,"
Margaret said with her lively tone.
"It's nothing. We were really looking forward to seeing the grandchildren."
As I responded cheerfully, Margaret suddenly switched to a familiar tone and whispered in my ear,
"That's good to hear. It's truly a pleasure to look after the grandchildren, isn't it?"
Then, with a cunning smile, Margaret presented an unbelievable demand.
"Since you get to see your adorable grandchildren, I'll be charging $500 per child."
I couldn't understand what she was saying at first. What did you just say?
"I said, since you're taking care of the grandchildren, I'm charging $500 per child."
I was completely dumbfounded. It would make sense if Margaret was paying us to take care of the children, but the reverse was just outrageous.
"You're joking, right?"
Then Margaret stopped laughing and replied seriously, "I'm not joking. I'm entrusting strangers with my precious children. Naturally, you should pay a rental fee."
"Strangers? A rental fee?"
I felt not just anger but also sadness at Margaret's words. Mark, having gotten the children off his back, came towards us. "Margaret, that's an incredibly unreasonable thing to say. Taking care of children isn't easy." But Margaret, without any hint of guilt, coolly retorted, "What was once common sense is now nonsense. For example, men without girlfriends pay for dates with women, right? It's the same idea." Mark and I exchanged looks of disbelief.
"Either way, what's wrong is wrong. If that's how you're going to be, we won't take care of the kids."
"Are you planning to neglect them? This is why the elderly are disliked these days." Saying this, Margaret grabbed David's arm, intending to leave. David, silent, just followed Margaret without a word.
Wait! We're not done talking!
Mark tried to stop them, but without turning back, Margaret said, "We have to go now, our flight is soon."
Wait! Wait, Margaret!
In a panic, I realized something and called out to Margaret.
You left your luggage in the car, but what about the kids' clothes? Could you buy them?
We didn't prepare any clothes for the kids. Margaret said this nonchalantly and got into the car.
Make sure you send $2,000 in total, $500 for each of the 4 kids, to David by Monday.
Saying this, David and Margaret drove off. What was Margaret thinking, not even preparing clothes for the children to wear? We can't let them stay in the same clothes, so we decided to go shopping at a mall far from our home. But I worried whether the 4 grandchildren would stay calm at home while we were gone.
I'm worried about leaving them at home alone. I wish someone could go buy the kids' clothes for us.
First, try to measure the grandchildren's sizes as best you can. I'll go buy them alone.
That would be a great help.
Just hang in there a little longer. Be quiet, okay? When Mark scolded them, another grandchild kicked at his leg.
You bad kid! I'll show you.
Seeing his sibling being scolded, they must have thought they were being attacked by a villain. I wondered how to make them understand we're not the enemy. We could only sigh. Are you sure you'll be okay alone? Call me immediately if anything happens. With that, Mark went off to town. The thought of me, an elderly person, looking after 4 energetic grandchildren alone wasn't without its anxieties. Just when I thought they were quietly playing games in the room, one would suddenly dash outside. When they returned covered in mud after ravaging the crops in the field, I was so frustrated I ended up laughing instead. There was only one set of pajamas David used to wear as a child, so I tried to rush them into the shower. But they resisted and tried to escape the bathroom. Do you take showers every day? Ever since the kids arrived, I had been concerned about a certain smell. Not just their ragged clothing, but a body odor filled the air with slight movement. Removing their clothes revealed them caked in dirt, as if they hadn't showered in days. Thinking of Margaret's stylish attire and strong perfume made me feel helpless. After much struggle, they finally showered, but then the other grandchildren were missing. Hearing the neighborhood dog barking loudly, I went outside fearing the worst and found the grandchildren throwing things at the dog.
Stop that! It's not right! Don't you feel sorry for it? But it's really fun. Look, it's barking. I told you to stop. What you're doing is very wrong.
Scolding them angrily made the children quiet down. Then they said something I hadn't anticipated.
But Mom always does the same thing. We were just imitating her.
I was completely exhausted. I wondered if we could really take care of them until David and Margaret returned, as my anxiety grew. Then, Mark returned, laden with bags of clothes for the grandchildren. Are you okay? You look pale, you must be tired. I'll take care of the grandchildren, Elizabeth. You should rest a bit.
But I can't just leave it all to you.
The children, having forgotten they were scolded, were energetically running around again. Watching them, Mark sighed and said, "Should I take action?"
Yes, I think that would be best.
Continuing as things are, our strength won't last, and more importantly, it's not good for the grandchildren's education. Because we love our grandchildren, we need to help them become decent people, so I agree with Mark's suggestion. Mark and I took the grandchildren to a boarding school deep in the mountains.
It's been a while. We're in your care again.
This time it's the grandchildren? They do remind me of David. In truth, when David went through a rebellious phase and refused to attend school, we had placed him in this boarding school. Unaware of the harsh life ahead, The children looked around curiously. On the first day, the grandchildren struggled to wake up past the designated time. Likely because they were used to staying up late playing games. They finally got out of bed when a staff member came to wake them. They hadn't ever tidied up their bedding themselves, so reluctantly, I showed them how at first. Do it like this. You've always seen Mom do it, right? One of the grandchildren shook their head.
I've never seen Mom tidy up the bed.
Really? So the bed stays like that? I was astounded but not surprised given Margaret's behavior. After waking, they were supposed to gather in the hall. But the grandchildren couldn't stay put and tried to wander off, quickly being brought back by staff. The breakfast was simple, to the grandchildren's dissatisfaction.
There's no meat. It's too bland. I want instant noodles.
That's not available here, Mark said, and the grandchildren sulkily clicked their tongues but eventually started eating in silence. After breakfast, they had to clean their rooms. Having never cleaned or tidied before, I taught them how to fold their clothes first.
Go ahead, try it.
The grandchildren attempted to fold their clothes, but initially, they couldn't do it well. However, after repeated tries, they got the hang of it and could fold nearly as well as we could. Dinner also had to be prepared by themselves. The grandchildren showed a sense of accomplishment with their first cooking experience. After dinner, there was a social gathering, and although they were exhausted from the unfamiliar hard work and dozed off at first, by the third day, they seemed to have gotten used to the work.
If you treat others with consideration, good things will come back to you manifold.
The children listened intently to the staff's words.
Don't make the weak suffer or cause them pain. Don't be selfish and inconvenience others. If those around you are happy, it will come back around, making you happy too.
By the time we left the boarding school, the grandchildren had stopped being so selfish. One of them, seeing me struggle with heavy luggage, stepped forward to help.
I'll carry it.
You rest, Grandma. Thus, the grandchildren's one-week boarding school program ended successfully. On the way home, I noticed many missed calls from David on my mobile phone. Margaret and he must be enjoying their trip abroad. Thinking this, I cheerfully called back, and it was Margaret on the line.
What's going on? We've been waiting, but there's been no payment.
Margaret was ranting irritably on the phone. There was poor reception at the boarding school, so we hadn't been in contact. I remembered Margaret demanding that we send $2,000 by Monday before they left for their trip. Why are you so upset? Is something wrong? Given her insistence on money before they left, it seemed they planned to enjoy their trip with our money from the start. Now that their plan fell through, David and Margaret appeared to be in trouble.
Don't joke around. Make sure you transfer $2,000 today.
Margaret's commanding tone irritated me. I couldn't help but wonder if that was the proper way to ask for something. I have no intention of giving you money, so enjoy your trip and don't forget souvenirs for the children.
That's ridiculous. What you're doing is no different from theft.
If you want to sue, go ahead. I doubt the police will bother with something like this, and you'll only embarrass yourself. Just so you know, Margaret, I have no intention of supporting you and David anymore. And I will ensure the inheritance goes directly to the grandchildren.
We're the ones looking after the children. Supporting us is also for the children's sake. Wait a minute. What are you thinking, Mom?
David, having snatched the phone from Margaret, spoke in a frantic tone. This is something Dad and I decided together. We're tired of financially supporting you. From now on, fend for yourselves. Responding to David's panic, I spoke in a calm, instructive tone.
Don't be ridiculous. I can't believe you'd say something so cold.
Margaret apparently took back the phone. Her condescending remarks resumed.
You always said how much you love the grandchildren. Supporting us is also for their sake. You were happy when David was born, weren't you? Through the fertility treatments and the difficult birth, I've heard. Yet, you're willing to abandon David, your own child, after all that pain? Remember, supporting us is for the sake of your adorable grandchildren.
Let me talk to her. Mark, who had been silently listening, took over the phone.
You really have some nerve. Are you and David even parenting properly? Their clothes are tattered, and they hadn't been showered, had they?
There was silence on the other end, with no comeback. I took the phone back from Mark and spoke my mind to Margaret. Children grow up watching their parents. Their bodies might grow on their own, but empathy for others must be taught.
Come on, Mom. This isn't the time for such discussions. We really need money right now.
Stop being childish, don't depend on us forever. As I scolded him over the phone, one of the grandchildren tugged at my sleeve.
There's no need to pay.
Even the young one could sense something was wrong with their parents' attitude, saying so with a resigned sigh. If the grandchildren are ever in trouble, I'll help. But I have no intention of supporting you two anymore. Be prepared for that. With that, I unilaterally ended the call. I gently stroked the head of the grandchild who looked up at me worriedly, and they smiled back. Although they said they'd be away for 2 weeks, David and Margaret returned earlier. They had relied on parental support and didn't plan ahead, ending up with almost no money left. They didn't even bring back souvenirs. Both looked utterly exhausted when they came to pick up the children.
We never should have left the children with you.
Margaret started complaining as soon as she entered. I guided David and Margaret to sit on the living room sofa. As I mentioned on the phone, are you really taking care of the children? Their clothes were torn, and they hadn't been bathed. This is clearly neglect. Neither David nor Margaret could find the words to respond. We handed over the grandchildren for the time being, but soon we heard rumors. The children were always seen in the same clothes, and neighbors complained about the smell. Sometimes, Child Protective Services visited David and Margaret's apartment. Eventually, the rumors of neglect reached the executives at David's company. In line with recent social awareness, the company called David in for a warning to prevent further issues. Afterward, we revised our will as we told David and Margaret, leaving 90% of the inheritance to the grandchildren and the rest to David and Margaret. The grandchildren, perhaps suited to the boarding school, have since become calmer. They visit us, politely greet us, and even volunteer to wash dishes after meals. Lately, they've been helping us with gardening, sharing everything from school stories to their dreams. Apparently, they don't trust their parents and have never consulted them about anything.
Grandpa, Grandma, take us to the beach this summer break.
The grandchildren asked with sparkling eyes, and I smiled back.